Prime Day is coming July 16th and 17th. With epic deals exclusively for Prime members, you'll feel like you just won an award.
Oh, wow, I didn't even prepare a speech. I'd like to thank my family for always needing stuff. Also Sam, my delivery guy, for bringing all my awesome deals so fast. You're the man, Sam!
Shop deals on electronics, home, and more this Prime Day, July 16th and 17th.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Parker said, sometimes with the British film industry, it's hard to know if we're waving or drowning. Let's find out. Welcome to another Britflicks podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today I've got with me Larry Smith, Director of Photography. Larry Smith. Hello, Larry.
Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I'm all right. Now, I'm not going to name all your films. I'll just name some of them, of the ones I really love. Films you've been director of photography on that I love a lot are Calvary and The Guard, directed by John Michael McDonough. Only God Forgives, Bronson and Fear X. I mean, Wind and Refn is an absolute hero of mine. And then Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. But obviously, your for those people that know your name, your career, I guess, started out in the 70s working on Barry Lyndon in 75. So it feels like no introduction needed, but with those kind of names, I just thought I'd better throw out people that don't have their film history books to hand.
Well, pleasure to be here. Nice to talk to you and your audience.
Can you differentiate the job of the director from and then how you would describe the role of the director of photography on a feature film?
Yeah, sure. Of course, it's changed dramatically since I first came into the business because of the way films are made now, with much more input or control from the director than was normal when I first came in. Normally, certainly in the 60s and 70s, the role of the director of photography was all-encompassing in terms of the look and the camera movement and and some input into the set design, and you had really carte blanche to do what you wanted, and invariably you weren't interfered with. Certainly a bigger name director of photographers weren't interfered with. Directors directed, director of photographers did the lighting and the camera, etc. Production designers design. That's changed dramatically now, whereas most directors want to be involved in every aspect of the filmmaking process, including sometimes the lighting and shot selection, etc., etc. So the variation is nowadays, obviously, the directors is the overall sort of head of department, of a movie, in the sense that, he has to work with the actors, he has to approve the sets, he likes to, in some cases, approve the lighting, what you're going to do, costume, makeup, etc. Whereas the direct photography is normally involved in, lighting the set, the camera movement, the choice of lenses, and to some extent involved in where you shoot certain locations at what time of day, where the sun is, etc., etc.
Is that an evolution in terms of the emphasis on the greater involvement with the director? Is that like the last 20 years, or is that?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't really know where it came from. Certainly a lot of directors that came out of commercials, advertising, that got into film kind of tended to work that way anyway, so there might be a little bit of link there. But I think it is It is partly evolution, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not really sure. I think sometimes it's hard enough to make movies today as it is, and I think if each other department has more autonomy in what they do, I kind of feel that's better. But it's not necessarily the way it is with some people. This is not across the board. It's just that is the trend.
I guess it's a collaborative medium, isn't it? But also a film set is probably the closest working environment to the army as well, with it being hierarchical as well.
Exactly that. Yeah, it is a collaboration, and of course you have to have that level of collaboration. I guess it's where collaboration becomes interference. Is where the line gets crossed. Yeah.
You're in some ways. You're the expert, and that's why you're there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, but it is, as I say, I'm quite lucky. I think I've been quite lucky, with most of the people I've worked with. I've always had that freedom to, make the decisions I felt were right. So I'm one of the ones that can't really complain about the new wave of filmmakers.
In terms of when you started, am I right in thinking you came from exhibition lighting background? Is that right? Is that where you?
Basically, yes. I was working in. I did an apprenticeship as an electrician, in actual fact, and then I didn't really like that. I mean, I liked it, but I didn't like that kind of work. I didn't like, I didn't like the cold weather in particular.
None of us like that. None of us like that.
Cold, no, exactly. And so I kind of fell into exhibition lighting, which was, I guess, the forerunner to advertising in a way. When I think back now, because advertising wasn't really there was no real advertising as such at that period of time, and I kind of fell into it, and I thought, wow, this is an amazing world where you get, because it was quite glamorous, there was, in those days they used to use lots of models almost for anything, for handing out a cup of coffee to laying on the bonnet of a car, and the motor show, etc., or the Ideal Home exhibition. And I thought this was wonderful. I'd never quite seen anything like this before. And of course, it had the extra element of being able to travel, which I hadn't really done up until that time. So I found this like a really interesting way. It paid very well. You built things up very quickly, then you took them down. It wasn't a forever job, which made it more interesting, that whole variety thing. So yeah, that's basically where I kind of came from, and then in a way fell into film lighting as a link to that.
Was the Barry Lyndon thing where you first came into it, or had you already had tastes?
No. I was in before that. I mean, basically what happened was that years ago, the electrical trade union, I think as it was then, it was the ETU, I think it was called, had a film branch at Highbury Place in London, and because you were in that union, you were able to go to that branch, and you could lodge a ticket to get into the film industry, and every now and again, they had big call. In those days, of course, there was no such thing as four-wheel studios. All the studios, like Shepperton, MGM's, EMI as it then was, or ABPC as it then was rather, Pinewood, had made their own films. They were all very, very busy in terms of the amount of films that the British film industry turned out at that time, much more then than we do now. And they, of course, had people permanently employed there, like, gaffers and even DOPs, camera operators, across the board, and employed a huge amount of people. But then every now and again they'd get sort of bigger films, and then they would need more people. And I kind of got in that way. I got a call out one summer to go to do a film at Shepperton called The Best House in London with Warren Mitchell. Remember Warren Mitchell?
I do indeed, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I got called out with 40 other electricians and went to Shepperton. That was my first real taste of the business. And we sat around, because the films were starting up and they just wanted to have the labour force there. And I sat around for like a week. Didn't really do anything. We were sat in a canteen drinking tea for a week, but I used to walk onto the sets and walk up into the gantry, and so I could have a better view, just to get a sort of an idea of what it was, how things worked. And so I did. I worked there at Shepperton, but it wasn't very busy. I found it not very interesting. I wasn't stimulated by that, so I decided not to stay at Shepperton, and I went back to exhibition lighting. And then a little while later, and I don't know how long later, maybe it was about a year later, I think there was a sort of a very small lighting company that started up with people that were with a background in exhibition called Lee Lighting, which you've probably heard of, with the two brothers, John and Benny Lee. And they were sort of growing. At that time, the studios were beginning to, shed the four-wall thing. MGM's had closed, and advertising was in its infancy. And there was just an opening there for a young company to come in, which they were. They were one or two other small companies at that time, and they drew their labour force from people in the exhibitions, and also people that lived in a certain part of London. They were from West London, Notting Hill, where I was from originally, and that was the conduit, if you like, to get into the mainstream film lighting, which I did, and they grew enormously over a very short period of time. So I worked for them for a short period of time, but then I kind of decided to be freelance. I like the whole freelance thing, where you can work in a particular area for a certain amount of time, then take some time off, that whole variety thing, which is what I did. And it was about that time when I was freelance that Barry Lyndon had started. So I went on to Barry Lyndon as a freelance, just literally to do 2 weeks' work. And a year and a half later, I was still there.
No, that's quite an amazing story, that is. that you go there for a week, 2 weeks, and find you're still on the payroll 18 months later.
Yeah, and it did extend beyond that, to be absolutely honest. I mean, it extended more or less, right the way through to The Shining, because I was, once I got to know Kubrick, I got on very well with him, and he used to like to have me around, to do things and collaborate on potential things that were coming up.
I loved your analogy of referring to dealing with Kubrick as like playing a tennis pro. If you're quick enough to hit the ball back, he'll play with you, but if you're not... Absolutely,
and one of the things that Stanley always used to like to do after a film, after one of his movies, the in-between periods where he was at his most relaxed and easygoing, and was, it's like you and I talking now, really. We would analyse the people that he didn't think did very well, and the people that did well, that he thought were good. And quite often, because of that very fact, where he would sometimes serve an ace, the person at the other end never really had a chance to get their racket on it, and therefore he didn't give them the opportunity to see how good they were sometimes. Because working around Stanley, a lot of people went to jelly, because he was such a smart intellectual man. And sometimes he would ask very, very searching questions, straight off the bat, and sometimes when you're not prepared for that, even if you're super smart yourself, you give a bad answer. You know what I mean? It's like going to an interview. You come out of an interview, you've done really badly, purely because, for whatever reason, you just never answered this question, and then you answered the next one badly, and then you lost confidence. You know what I mean? And Stanley used to take that as a weakness, and it wasn't always a weakness, and it isn't, as you well know, always a weakness. Sometimes you can do a bad interview. It doesn't make you bad at what you do necessarily.
You weren't that aware of Kubrick, the kind of master visionary director. You knew he was a filmmaker, didn't you? But you weren't that jelly-legged newbie on set, were you? That was kind of...
No, and basically, I didn't really know who he was. I mean, I knew he was an American film director, and he clearly had a presence. When I first met him, when he came onto the set down at Wilton House in in Salisbury. I clearly, you kind of, some people have an aura, and he's not a man that seeks that. He wasn't a man that ever sought that. He just had it. You could just see that the people around him were, very respectful of him.
Because he wasn't a shouter, was he, or anything like that?
No, certainly not. No, he could get upset, but no, he wasn't a screamer and a shouter like other directors I can mention. But I could see, but I didn't. I thought, well, I'm only here for 2 weeks. I don't need to know too much about this guy. It was 2 weeks' work to me. It wasn't more than that, And because, as I say, I really hadn't sort of put him on any kind of scale as to where he was. It was like meeting anyone. You just, you do that? Oh, great, fine. And you just do your job and you move on. It's just that, 2 weeks then got extended to 4 weeks. By the way, we weren't anywhere near shooting at this stage. We were just, getting sets ready and testing and doing things like this, which is why, it took us a while to even get into the set mode. And so by the time I really got to know him, to speak to him, it was probably, a few months down the line now. It's probably about 3 or 4 months into it when we were just beginning to start shooting, and we're still going out doing other tests.
I mean, famously on that film, there was the use of the NASA lenses for filming the candlelight. Were you involved with that testing?
Yes, I was. Yeah, because we all as a group had to, the electrical side certainly had to, provide, even though, there was candlelight, there were other sort of bounce lights. So we had our area of that was, that we obviously did tests on, because that's the one thing that Stanley was very strong about. He was a man that never liked surprises. He always wanted to know, what he was going to get. Once he started shooting. So we used to test that extensively.
Is it that kind of work process you went through and what you were trying to achieve? Is that something that influenced you as someone? And I think I read somewhere you're saying you like to go for the most natural look you can get, as it were. Is that influenced by that experience, or is it?
Stanley and I are really, as not as people, but as in terms of our work process, our workflow, we're very, very different. I'm very spontaneous, and he is very. He could have been a scientist. He likes to, look in every corner, look under every stone, and then come back and look again. The fear of missing something to Stanley was something that drove him. Whereas I'm like, I'm not someone, let's see what we get, So it's quite strange, really, that we had this long relation, because we were very, very different in our approach to filmmaking. But what I took away from working with Stanley was his understanding of film process. And by that I mean, for example, on Barry Lyndon, I can't remember what the film stock we were using then. It would have probably been not much faster than 50 ASA, may have been 100. The lenses were so much slower then than they are today. So, you obviously needed lots more lights and lots more time, that equated to time, which equates to money. By the time we had got from Barry Lyndon to The Shining, for example, we had moved to 500 or 400 ASA film, which is a huge jump. Also, in that time, we'd had HMIs were like in their infancy when we were doing Barry Lyndon. We didn't use HMIs. We used, Brutes, arc lights, and mostly tungsten. But in that period, HMIs had come up. And were replacing the more conventional lights like Brutes. I can't remember what the biggest one that was around, probably something like maybe a 12 kilowatt HMI. Stanley immediately read into that was, hang on, we've suddenly got these lights that are bigger and more powerful. We've suddenly got film stock, which is, 2 or 3 times faster than film stock. We've got lenses that can now shoot at 1.3, 1.4, whereas probably on Barry Lyndon, the lenses we were using were probably, 2.8 lenses. I can't remember for sure. So it's a massive. And immediately because he was a producer director, immediately equated what that meant in real terms of how you can manipulate film. In terms of you need less lights, you need less people, it's quicker, etc., etc. Now it always staggered him that lights were getting bigger, film stock was getting faster, lenses were getting faster, but people were using bigger lights and more lights, and he never understood that. And I got that very quickly, what he was talking about, and that's really where I took on from what I learned working with him, that and obviously other things like how to use locations and how to get the best out of locations for the best money, etc.
I guess the best way to sort of illustrate that is if you see the kind of TV productions of the 80s. It's like everything's under a fluorescent light. It's that bright. There's no black, is there, on TV in the 80s?
No. Well, he told a very interesting story. Was when he did Spartacus. Or when he took over on Spartacus, I should say, he was just a paid hand, basically, and he used to sit in a chair and see this beautiful backlit sunlight on whatever scene he was shooting, and of course he had a DOP imposed on him by the studio, and he used to sit and watch. It used to take hours. They bring a big truck of lights in. Arc lights, and fill in all that beautiful shadow area that had been created by this beautiful backlight, and he just used to shake his head in despair that they'd never got how to use light. This was a Hollywood cameraman at that time, which is again, it's how you use natural light. It's how it's that high key look that Hollywood was about. Rather than, for example, more of a modern look, like the Tony Scott, Ridley Scott look, for want of a better analysis of people that sort of were working in that way. But people were still coming in using lots of fill and killing all of the contrast. And
it's interesting because obviously when we think about sort of great paintings and early photography. It was all about the perfect picture is all about how you see it, isn't it? As opposed to being able to see everything, which I think is a kind of it's a weird schizophrenia sometimes in film, isn't it? You mentioned great painters and great photographers. You can go back and look at some of the great photographers. I mean, we still have one or two of the real. Wolfgang Straczynski. I'll give you an example. He's over 100 now. You look at the stuff he was doing in the 20s and the 30s. His still photography. The clarity is just incredible, given what they were working with then. But it's manipulation. It's people understanding, what you can get, on a given day in a given light level, etc., etc. And again, if you go back to painters, great painters, if you think about how they worked, if you think about the tools that they would use over and above the brushes and the paints and the easel, for example, they would invariably work by daylight next to a window because that was their only source of light. Okay, so therefore the window light was the natural source of light. If it was night light, they would be working with candles. We do exactly the same thing today, only we work by daylight, but we would punch a light through the window to accentuate the daylight. And instead of candlelight, we'll be using practical lights. And to me, what's changed? I don't see what's changed. Nothing's changed. And we just use more modern techniques to get the same results that great painters work by. Fast forward, this is sort of, I'm leaping over quite a lot here to get to Eyes Wide Shut. Where you are his director of photography, you are Stanley Kubrick's director of photography on that film. Now, it will amaze listeners who don't know that you, when asked originally, you said, "Can I sleep on it?"
Well, because I had worked for literally more or less constantly 13 years with Stanley up until The Shining, and also as sort of a kind of an unpaid advisor on Full Metal Jacket. After the 13 years, and I go back to what I said at the beginning of this podcast about variety of work and being able to move around. It was like a regular job to me, and I never wanted to do a regular job for that long. As much as working with Stanley was probably the most interesting time of my life, there is a point where, you know, after 13 years, you need to do something else. You need to branch out. And I decided at that time to form my own lighting company, which I'd already done before The Shining. In fact, I wasn't actually going to work on The Shining. I was only going to set it up, and then I was going to jump off of it, because I had already started my own lighting company. I already had a couple of, you know, young DOPs that I was working with, and I was very excited by that. But, you know, Stanley's a very hard man to leave, you know, when he doesn't want you to go, and you know, and also that loyalty thing kicks in with me, that, you know, I felt that I might be betraying him even at the expense of myself, you know. So a lot of soul searching went on. But after The Shining, so I did The Shining. After Shining, there was no way I was going to do Full Metal Jacket. Because by this time I'd established a small lighting company that was growing in advertising, and I'd bought a small building. I did a film called Give My Regards to Broad Street, and that was really what launched my lighting company, and that enabled me to, you know, buy more equipment. And then I bought a small building in King's Cross, and then had a little studio to the side. And so that was what I was developing. So I did that for literally until just after Eyes Wide Shut. I had this company, and but in between building this company up, I suddenly started to like commercials. I got offered to like commercials, which is what I did, and I was doing that, you know, very successfully during that period up until just prior to being asked to go on Eyes Wide Shut. And I was very happy doing that. You know, I was making good money, I was in charge of my own destiny, and I knew to go back to work with Stanley would be body and soul again for however long. I knew it wouldn't be less than a year. I knew I wouldn't get any peace, you know, in that sense, you know, because when you work with Stanley, you know, he wants to talk to you, you know, as often as he requires that, and that's not always convenient when you've got a life, you know. So it wasn't like I was coming into it as a fresh-faced person, never worked with Stanley before, and would have done it just for the honour of doing it. I was coming in from a different angle. I was coming in from a reasonably, I would say, successful, you know, commercial career as a DOP, and I didn't feel that I wanted to give that up. That was really the reason why I needed to think about it. I also knew that he had people that wrote to him, big name cinematographers from all around the globe, that wanted to work on that film for no pay.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And people did that. People had that. So many people wanted to work with Kubrick. Actors, production designers, you name it. Just that they would do it for no pay.
What do you think it was about wanting to work with him? Was a lot of it just perception, or was much of it they knew they'd gain something by working with him?
Well, people that already had a name wouldn't gain anything from it because they already had a name. So I don't know, you know, and clearly money wouldn't have come into it if they'd. But I think it was they either, idolised him as a filmmaker, which a lot of people, as you well know, do. I mean, I think if you go into, and I know there's less of them around now, the big DVD stores that you get in LA, and you go and you look at all of the big name directors that are up there, have got their films. The section under Stanley Kubrick is probably twice as big as any other director, you know. So that gives you some idea of, you know, in what esteem he's held, you know, in particularly in America and elsewhere. So it doesn't really surprise me that people do that. I mean, I know for a fact that I was speaking to Jack Nicholson on The Shining, and we were just talking very early days when he came onto it, and I said, oh, you know, who, by the way, was absolutely the perfect person for that role. But he had got his agent, Jack Nicholson, I think, just got his second Oscar maybe at that time. So he was probably number one in the world at that time in terms of male actors. And but he got his agent to call Stanley to see if there was a chance to do that film. That gives you some idea. If someone like Jack Nicholson wanted to work with Stanley, far be it from anyone, a cinematographer or whoever that would get the opportunity. You can understand why it was that they would want to do that. So, just to jump back to your question now. So when he asked me, I hadn't seen him for a number of years. I had seen him about a year before. He asked me, what I didn't know is he had been following my career. This is what I didn't know at this time.
Okay.
So he called me up to the house. He called me up one day. I was in my studio in London. He said, "How are you?" And it's very interesting. I hadn't spoken to Stanley for, I can't remember how many years. It was 9 or 10 years maybe, which is a long time not to speak to Stanley. Even if you're not working with him, because he would always call up for some reason. It could be some trivial matter. He's got some people working in his house and they're not doing this, and what would you give him, say, well, this is what they should be doing, and blah, 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 So he called me up and said, what new lights are around? So I said, I used the Dido lights a lot. They were a very small focus light, which I really like. And he always liked small lights, Stanley, low lights and things like that. I said, well, I've got these lights. I said, I think you'd probably like them. I said, I think, next time you do something, they might be, something that you'd really like. He said, can you bring some up to the house and show me? And I said, yeah, sure. So I said, this was like in the morning. This was like about 10 in the morning. And we had this, by the time we'd got round to talking about lights, we'd already had a 3-hour conversation on the telephone that went like 5 minutes, because we were talking about films and talking about this and that. And, he's a very engaging person to talk to on the telephone. And he can talk about anything and everything. And we did on this morning. So the phone call was just about, he said, can you bring some up at the house? I said, yeah, sure. So he said, what time will you be here? And I said, Stanley, I can't come now. I'd already wasted 3 hours that morning of stuff I could not wasted, but things I could have been doing. And he said, well, why not? I said, I'm just going to the gym. And he went really quiet and he went, you're going to the gym? Why would you go to the gym? He couldn't understand that. Why would I go to the gym now? I said, well, because I go every day or every couple of days, and I've got my shorts on, and I was going to go before you called me this morning. He said, well, can't you go tomorrow? I said, yeah, I can, but I'm going to miss out. He said, well, okay, go to the gym. What time can you get here? So I said, I'll come up later on this afternoon. So I put 2 cases of these small Dido lights. So I think some people call them Dados. I call them Didos. But I put them in my car and went up to see him. And we went in his kitchen. We had some coffee and we talked about everything but these lights. And then it's now about 7 or 8 in the evening, And so I said, Stanley, do you want to see these lights or not? He went, oh, yeah, let's go over to stable block. We had this stable. So I put some up and showed him what they did. He said, yeah. Wasn't interested at all. Kind of was interested, but wasn't interested. And I got in my car and went home. And the next day he called me again. He said, oh, thanks for bringing those up, and it was really great. And let's talk some more. So that was the end of it. I found myself at Pinewood Studios. He used to use a continuity lady called June Randell, who sadly passed away sometime last year.
Are you sensing the subtext here at all, or are you just thinking he's beat?
No. I'm just telling this is I hadn't seen June since The Shining. I don't think. I'm walking past one of the studios at Pinewood. She called me over. Larry, come over. You're doing. It wasn't Eyes Wide Shut. It was the film before that, which I think was called The Velici Papers. That he put He said, "You're doing Stanley's film, The Velici Papers." I went, "No, I'm not. I've never heard of that film." She said, "Yeah, you are. I know you are." So I said, "June, let me tell you, I'm not." What happened after that was he shelved The Velici Papers because it was a very similar movie to Schindler's List. And he had spent about $6 million on it, researching it and whatever, but he decided to shelve it. And then he picked up Eyes Wide Shut again, which he had had, as you know, the Tom Neville novel for many, many years. And, he always wanted to make it. He's got in production for that. And so then, a year or so later, I get the call, would you come up to the house again? Can I drive you to this location? And blah, 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 blah. And we talked about, how to light the exterior of the masked ball. And I said, well, I'd do this. I'd put this big light back there, etc., etc. He went, interesting. He was driving, by the way. We drove back to the house. We had spent another few hours just talking and blah, blah, blah. And didn't mention anything about Eyes Wide Shut, just how would I like that? I go away. About 2 weeks later, I get another phone call. So, what do you think? What do I think about what? What do you think about the film? What film, Stanley? Because at this stage he hadn't told me the name of it. He hadn't told me, he assumed that I knew, and in actual fact I didn't. He said, well, the film, Eyes Wide Shut. Do you want to do it? I said, no, sorry, prior to that, Jan he'd got Jan, his producer, his brother-in-law, to ask me. And I said to Jan, I can't tell you now. I need a couple of weeks. I need to sleep on it. I need a couple of weeks, because I knew what it would be like. Then Jan called me again and said, Stanley doesn't understand. Why are you not, why are you not talking? Why are you not going to do this film? And I said, well, because, I'm just not sure. Then Stanley called me. So he said, Larry, do you want to do it or not? And I said, well, are you asking me to do it? Are you personally asking me to do it, Stanley? And this may sound really strange, this conversation that you and I are having now, but this is exactly how it happened, And I said, he said, well, do you want to do it? I said, well, are you asking me? And it was a bit like that. It was a bit of a standoff. I said, okay, I'll let you know tomorrow, Stanley, which is kind of basically what I did. And in the end, of course, the rest is consigned to history now. I did it.
I mean, at that moment, was you ever going to say no then?
It was again. I think so. I think it was a bit like the Shining thing. It was a bit. It was only the fact that he had personally asked me, to do it, as opposed to asking Jan, who was obviously getting a hard time from Stanley because he hadn't got the answer from me. But it's the very fact that when Stanley gets on the phone and he talks to you about someone, and and he said to me, Larry, do you realise what this would do to your career? And because I'd always had this relationship with Stanley, I said, Stanley, I've got a career. If I do this film, the only reason I will do it is because you personally have asked me as, if you like, as a friend, as opposed to I had to go through an agent and had to have an interview or etc. And that's the meaning. That is the power of Stanley Kubrick, if you like, to get somebody on board one of his projects, because he knew by talking to me that I wasn't anywhere near 100% sure that I wanted to do it, and he knew that. But with Stanley, he respected that. He respected the fact that I didn't just say yes for the sake of doing a film and getting the credit working with Stanley Kubrick.
How did you discuss the working relationship with you as his director of photography for the first time? I know you've worked in that capacity, but this is now officially you are his. How did you? Because obviously you want to do your best work. You just don't want you don't want to be just on set doing the lighting for Stanley Kubrick, do you? Exactly,
and there was another part of the dilemma, because if you look back to 2001, Jeffrey Unsworth, fantastic cinematographer, obviously had a hard time on that with Stanley. That's the last time that Stanley used, if you like, an already established director of photography. When he did Clockwork Orange, he used John Alcott, another fantastic cinematographer, but he used John because John was his focus puller on 2001, and John did extra photography, and Stanley knew with John he had someone he could work with, he could mould, he could manipulate, if you like. And therefore, John did Clockwork Orange, obviously under the wing of Stanley, and obviously would have to do things that Stanley wanted to be done. Then he went away from Clockwork Orange and became a cinematographer in his own right. And then obviously came back, and did Barry Lyndon. Again, working always. I mean, when you work with Stanley, you work with him, but you work for him. And if Stanley wants to do something, you do it. That's the bottom line. So John was happy to go along with that, and he did Barry Lyndon. I was surprised that he came back to do The Shining because he was very established cinematographer by that time. But you see, my point is he started as the focus puller, under the wing of Stanley. Okay. Then after The Shining, the same thing happened to Doug Milsom. Doug did extra photography on The Shining after John left, and then was brought on under Stanley's wing to do Full Metal Jacket. Great opportunity. It's what John did. It's what Doug did. I was coming from a different angle. I was already a successful commercial cinematographer at that stage and was making good money and was very content with my life. And I didn't want to give that up. And I knew I would have to give that up. So I talked with Stanley, about that, and he said, "Larry, have what camera you want. You're the DOP, do what you want." But I knew that wouldn't be the case. I knew that wouldn't be the case, and of course it wasn't the case. Yeah, I did have an input, and I did used to argue my corner on using certain techniques. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but we force developed the whole of that movie.
Yeah, was it 2 points?
Two stops, and I would fought with him every day about that because with modern film stocks, and especially someone who knew about film like Stanley did. I never thought that was necessary, and it's not a science. 2 or 3 seconds in the bath a bit longer, or 2 or 3 seconds in the bath too short. You get a different, look, and and I knew that would be potentially a problem, and we did have problems with that sort of going along. Not too many, to be fair, but we had it. So I fought with him about that, and I would we would heavily discuss, shall I say, aspects of it, but I was strong about that. I didn't, I felt very strongly about, that we shouldn't be doing that. We should be doing this. But, ultimately, there's only ever going to be one winner in those kind of discussions. So, it's about having the right to try to change his mind.
What would be your advice for the budding DOP cinematographer to make that work? Even when like you say, sometimes only one person can be right. How do you manage that relationship to make it best for you?
Well, I think it depends on individual's personality. Some people are very, very good at being able to stay in a hostile environment, even though they're not enjoying it. Other people have a lesser threshold, and they say, you know what, I can't agree. I don't want to be unhappy. I don't want to fall out with you. Therefore, I'm going to leave. So some DOPs leave. Some DOPs just knuckle down and have a horrendous time, but just get the project done. Just finish it, And it really depends on the personality. I think I'm of the middle too. I'm one of those ones that, try to be professional enough to stay on a project, even though you're not enjoying it and you're not getting the results that you want, but to try and influence it in a different way. Luckily, to me, that hasn't happened very often, and I've more often than not been able to express myself with the way I work. So I think it's up to individuals how they deal with it. As I say, their personality will drive a lot of it. If they've got a really temperate personality, they're more likely to be able to work with across the board with all kinds of directors, good, bad, or indifferent. If you're a bit more volatile, then I think you have to sort of choose the directors very carefully that you work with.
Now, I want to ask you a question that's come from a friend of mine, John Baker, a director, who had a specific question about Eyes Wide Shut. His favourite movie scene ever is the ritual scene in Eyes Wide Shut. And he said, is it true that 25 minutes of footage was cut from the ritual scene? And if so, what did that contain? And then just generally, how long did that ritual scene take to shoot?
Well, it was shot in various parts. When you say the ritual, are you talking about the mask ball where they're around in the circle?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was shot in one part of the country, and where we're going through the house, and he's watching people, watching couples and ménage à trois, etc. That was shot at a different time in a different part of the country. That was shot somewhere out in Guildford, that place. But the Masked Ball was shot in a house up in the north of England. I can't exactly remember the name of the place. So that took us about that particular sequence took us. We shot that over a period of about 3 weeks.
Now, one of the things that stands out in terms of the sort of natural beauty of the film overall is this lovely contrast with the yellow tinge and the contrasting blue light that comes in through the windows. That I think, I mean, as far as this is just me watching it. It's like that. Those very sort of obvious lighting choices sort of they culminate in there's a moment towards the end where Tom Cruise's face is half lit blue, like he's wearing like a Phantom of the Opera mask, obviously in keeping with the rest of the masks of the film. I'm assuming that's no accident that I'm seeing it like that, is it?
No. I mean, basically, what happened was from the very, very first scene when I was pre-lighting Bill's apartment, Tom Cruise and Nico's apartment, I was just experimenting with the light coming through the window, the sort of night blue light. And, blue light, it tends to be not as blue as, moonlight tends to be not as blue as people think it is. It tends to be a bit more neutral. It's more like a white light. But the perception of blue light, of moonlight, is blue. It's what we, it's how we see it. And so I put this full blue on a tungsten light, which it effectively makes it daylight. And then I put a double full blue on, which made it very theatrical. Because that's what really the lighting was. There was nothing natural about that. It was more theatrical. In a way, not by accident. I had done this before, but kind of by accident. For this particular scene, I just put, and the reason that happened, because we were using tungsten lights and they were very, very hot. What happens with the blue? It starts to burn out, and so it loses its original blue, and it starts to go, for example, instead of being, say, for example, 5,000, 6,000 kelvins, it might drop down to 4,000 kelvins, which is more like a half blue, so halfway between tungsten and daylight, right? So what you do, just for speed, you just put another blue over it. So what I'd actually done was, only because I was just testing looks, so I put another blue over the original blue, which made it about 1.5 blues. And then I think I did that again, and you get back to a double blue. And Stanley saw it and he went, I said, don't worry about that. That's just because I've been. He said, yeah, but it's an interesting look. I said, yeah, but it's theatrical, And he went, yeah, but it's interesting. And Stanley used to have this saying where he always used to say, is it real or is it interesting? And and his theory was, forget real, it's interesting is better. So that's how that kind of developed, and we kept that look all the way through. Plus, with the force developing, it kind of changed it a little bit as well. So you've got this really kind of, in a way, an odd look, I would say.
The highlights are gorgeous, and then the blacks in it are something else, aren't they?
Yeah. So that was basically how that came about. It was partly by accident. Now, if I fast forward to the staircase scene when they go to the party, the first party that they're getting ready for, that curtain of light.
Yeah.
That came down. And that was something I was really strong about using, but Stanley never thought that they would be strong enough, and we wouldn't get enough stop, and the focus, it would affect the focus or whatever. But ultimately, in the end, we just doubled up and trebled up to get the luminance that much greater. But that was something he was really adamant against using, and I think that was, for me, that's one of the nicest, visual looks of the film when he's coming down that staircase.
Well, I mean, all of it really, in a way, because your base materials, were the rooms you're having to shoot in. They're quite ordinary rooms, aren't they? I mean, in so much that we're used to seeing them. I mean, they're grand because they're big and stuff, but the lighting and feel is what makes the film feel interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's how you use the space and how you use the production design, etc. That whole collaboration is really very, very important, I think.
Nicholas Winding Refn, which you've done, is 3 films I can see you've worked with him.
Yeah, I did. Fear X was the first film I did with him.
And Bronson.
And then Bronson, and then Only God Forgives, yeah.
Before we go into it, the fascinating thing that I always find when I listen to Nicholas talk about his work is, and I don't mean that he's talking to me, I just mean interviews and stuff, is his colour blindness. How soon into the process of knowing him or working with him were you made aware of this, and how do you mitigate it in your communication with him?
He told me when we first ever met. He said I'm absolutely colourblind. There's only 1 or 2 colours that I can see. I said, oh really? I said, oh, okay. I took it on board. I didn't think about it too much, because when I did Fear X, that was his first movie. Really, he'd done Pusher, but he hadn't done anything to there. And he was just a young director who clearly didn't have a real understanding of cameras and lighting to that extent. And I just went about my work like I do. I just lit this set like that, and I lit this set like that, and that was it. There was no real discussion. There wasn't any discussion on Fear X at all, because it was a short schedule and it was busy. So but Fear X wasn't really a film where where his lack of or his colour blindness would have impacted him too much. It was a fairly straightforward set. It wasn't a saturated film in any sense, whereas Bronson was, and so was obviously Eyes Wide Shut.
Only God Forgives.
Only God Forgives.
The reds and the blues in Only God Forgives are. It almost feels like the I don't know how you describe it. The kind of the neon kind of demon monkey face that's above the ring is almost like the colour palette for the film. Yeah.
Well, it was. That was something that we put in to link that. Again, it was in a way something that came around by accident. But the actual boxing ring had very minimal lighting in it, but it was red. They had a lot of there was some red fluorescence, and nowhere near enough. So what I did was I put a load more of these up as if they were naturally in the stadium, and I just put red on them, a double red on them, and then that became the theme, and then the face came out. I mean, Nicholas likes red anyway, but I just it's one of the colours he does see, and I just used that as a theme, and I thought, well, this is actually might as well be something that we might use, particularly in the boxing ring, and I just made more of it. And every time we needed to introduce another light source, I introduced another red light, and then the back of that boxing ring, which is where more or less the opening scene is, where they're. I forget what the opening scene is now. Do we start in the back? You'll be able to tell me.
We start to come out the back room, don't we?
Right. Okay. So that back room literally was how it was. It was just, those concrete things that you build walls with in gardens that have got shapes in them, that you just buy from Home Base or one of these places. It was that's all it was. There was a few partitions of that were already there, and a couple of benches, for the boxers, the Thai boxers, to get changed in. There was no set there. And so it was like, what do you do with this? How can you light this? There's nothing. So I just used those shapes there, and there was the back wall, the exterior wall had a few of them coming from the top, and I, used them. I used a sort of more of an amber light there, though. There was red in there as well. But I used more of an amber light. So, it was something that I used in those first 2 days, because there was, trying to give it some atmosphere, trying to give it some shape, because there was no shape there, and I tried to use, light to give the back room some personality. And then literally, because there was very little money for production design on the film, I kind of just took that theme around. So everywhere I went, everywhere there was a boring set or no set, shall I say, I just used a very theatrical form of lighting, which was more or less what I did on Bronson as well. Again, it was a very low budget film, and I just used, interesting orifices to shine lights through.
So when we're looking at the say the shoot up scene in the bar where the assassins come and try and shoot I think it's the police, isn't it? So is that on location or is that a set?
That's location. No, that's location. That was an actual cafe. That was an actual bar.
Because the serenity you've got that you've established in what you frame and what you've lit makes you feel like it's a studio.
Yeah, no, it's not. It was all just natural, throw it together as quickly as you can lighting,
Is it right? Am I right in thinking that you've said you're on record to say it's probably one of the toughest movies you've ever had to make?
Yeah, it was hard because it was 8 weeks of nights, and then we got into doing 6 days, and then it was like 30. Every night was the temperature was never less than mid-30s, sometimes up to 40 degrees. So it's very, very tiring when you're just only surviving, existing in night. You become nocturnal, as a person, and that's actually not very healthy.
I was going to say, how do you not go stir crazy?
Well, you do, and I did. That's why it was the hardest movie. At the end, I was just, I'd got quite sick on it. I kept getting bad throats, and all because of this whole working at night, and also the theme of the story, as you know, it's quite gruesome. If you were working at night and doing something, like, for example, a musical, you'd probably it's more uplifting. So the subject matter didn't help,
I'd never thought about that before, but you set in a scene. I mean, and like you say, some of the moments are extreme, aren't they? In terms, and Nicholas celebrated that when he was promoting the film. How does your ideas shape when you're being asked to sort of light something so visceral as compared to just say, here's some people in a room talking, let's make it interesting. But obviously when the focus is of something like, I'm thinking of when the person's getting stabbed in the chair and things like that, where obviously all the focus for the audience is on them, isn't it?
I think when you pick a location like the shootout, for example, if you know that part of the world, it's you get millions of fluorescent lights in all of the bars. It's just they're the most boring places to sit and eat those street food restaurants, and there's far too much light, so the first thing you do when you go, how do you make this look interesting? You turn off 90% of them, and then you just cut down. Well, what I did there was I just cut down, for example, if they were 4-foot fluorescents on the ceiling, I just used to, black wrap them, tape them up, and just use 6 inches of it. So it was like just a single source of light, just to try and give it some shape. Otherwise, it's just boring and flat. And then, use the exterior, link the exterior part of that with a bit of street lighting, and maybe pop a little light in somewhere if there was a dark space. And the rest of it, in a way, with modern cameras and modern wasn't film on that, it was digital. If you manipulate, at the end of the day, it's how you manipulate the images you're shooting to look the way that you think that they should look, to look interesting, to look pleasing to the eye. It
arrested me watching Only God Forgives for the first time. Because also you've got the other challenge, which is there's not a lot of talking going on, is there? So this film is being judged on what you put through the camera, isn't it, in many senses?
And of course, when I go back to what I was saying earlier on about having freedom to work, I just did on that film what I wanted to do. I just tried to make it look as interesting as it could, because I knew the whole narrative was very short and very small, and and what would help carry the film. And so I thought the lighting might.
It's interesting that you've worked with Kubrick, and now you're working with someone that's sort of, I guess, in the media, in the entertainment media, is classed as sort of a young pretender to Kubrick. Do you think that that comparison's fair on Wind and Refn. Never mind, is it true?
I don't think it is fair. I think they're completely different animals. I mean, Stanley was very pragmatic, very. The time he had to do, he worked on his stuff for years, whereas Nicholas tends to work on very short, low-budget films, impact films, if you like, and I don't think you have that kind of possibility of working. I know Nicholas loves a lot of the stuff that Stanley did and the way his compositions and things like that, but they're very, they're very different, totally different people, the way they work, and I think obviously, the results that they end up going for or getting.
I guess in a simple sense, and I'm a writer, a screenwriter, not a technician in terms of how you shoot a movie. But from a viewing point of view, it's that I think sometimes it's just simply that regular use of, say, centre perspective, which I think obviously Kubrick did brilliantly in his films, and I think Wind and Refn's fond of using it too. And it's a frame that's not always done well. So when it is, it kind of, I guess it always comes back to Kubrick, doesn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, I forget who said this. It might have been Steven Spielberg, I can't remember, but somebody said the thing about Kubrick is that Kubrick copies nobody. And he sets his own style, because when Stanley goes off and doesn't make a movie for 5 years, he watches stuff. Of course, he watches everything, he used to watch The Bill, on TV. Can you believe it?
No, I can't. No.
He used to find it he watched everything. He watched. You want to talk to him about sport? He knew everything about every sport. If there was a sport he was interested in, he talked. He was interested in cricket. He just used to watch everything, but he never. You can't say whatever he was watching never influenced him, because you never know in your subconscious how you get influenced. But he wouldn't be thinking, I read this Vogue book and I saw this beautiful model, therefore Nicole's going to be wearing this stuff, because she was kind of some of the things Stanley said, this dress will look good on you. She went, really? It's really clearly not what she wanted to wear. But Stanley never worried about that. He didn't care about that. So he just made his own films the way he wanted. Fast forward to one of his movies coming out, everybody was looking what Stanley was doing and trying to copy. So it's quite an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
You've now picked up the director's baton, and you've made a film called Trafficker. So that's quite a long while down the road, given your experience. I mean, I counted 20 feature films on your cinematographer, and that's just a cinematographer. That's not all the films you've worked on, and then countless adverts and stuff. Was director something that was always on the cards, or did you find a project that found you, as it were?
Well, I used to direct for a few years a lot of television commercials. So, I did go the directing route, but it was never, I never wanted it for it to be my day job. My day job, I'm a cinematographer. I enjoy it. I'm comfortable doing it. And I don't get too phased about it, or very rarely anyway. Directing was always something that I was going to do if I got the right project. And I had an offer. I've had various offers over the years, and I was very close to, doing a couple of movies, which in the end I pulled out of, because they just weren't, from what I read and what I set up and what I was prepping, they didn't end up being those kind of movies. So therefore I thought, well, I've got nothing to gain here and everything to lose. So, I was never desperate to be a movie director. I just always wanted to do something if the right story came along. And I had this story that I developed called A Hottentot Venus, which I was going to make. I like true stories. I like historical stories. And so I had this story that I wanted to make, which I'd been working on and had more or less had the money to make. And then a French Tunisian director made made a story, not the same story, but about the same person. And anyway, so I pulled the plug on that because it's crazy, to do that. I might revisit that at some time because that film never got shown, and it was made I've since seen the film, and it was nothing like my film. So I am prepared to pick that up again. So in the meantime, I'd read a script called it wasn't called Trafficker then, it was called something else, I can't remember, by a writer that I'd worked with. I did a film in Malaysia called The Blue Mansion, and the writer on that was a writer called Ken Quack, and he said, I've got this film, would you like to read it, tell me what you think about it? And I read it, and it was a true story, and I said, Ken, I think it's a great story. I said, he said, well, I've given it to Ken, to Glenn Gui, who directed Blue Mansion, and to see if he wants to do it. I said, well, it's a great story. I think, I said I knew a little bit about the story, but I didn't realise it was quite as intricate as it was. Cut to me giving up on the Hottentot Venus. I then speak to Ken, and I said, Ken, what happened to your film? And he said, oh, Glenn's still got it. I said, well, is he ever going to make it? I said, I think I might be able to get the money to make this. So he said, I'm going to ask him. And I said, well, ask him. No, I said, I'll ask him today. And he called Glenn up because they both live in Singapore. And Glenn said, no, I'm not going to do anything with it. So he gave it back to the writer, and then I had an agreement with the writer. And I sort of, because I passionately believed in the story, it's a story about capital punishment. And I don't make any views about capital punishment, but, it was a story that ultimately is about capital punishment, but it's not about capital punishment. It's a story about two brothers who leave Vietnam in the 80s with their family. They were 3 and 5 years of age, and their family are on their way to Malaysia, and the horrific things that happen to them on the way. And I just thought, wow, this is just such a morally compelling story. And also, as we now see with what's going on, very topical. So I got the money, and it was a very low budget. I shot it in Thailand. I used Bangkok for Vietnam. Well, not Bangkok. I used parts of Thailand for Vietnam. Australia, which is really where the film takes place. And, I made it there. And hopefully you'll get a chance to see it soon. So to answer your question, no, it wasn't a driving force. It's not necessarily something I may even do again. I've had an offer to do something else, and I may resurrect the Hottentot Venus. So it's on stuff that's that's out there's on the back burner, and I could pick up at any time.
And it's called Trafficker, yeah.
It's called Trafficker, yeah.
And Nicholas Winding Refn exec produced it, didn't he?
No, that was originally what was going to happen. But I think what happened was, which was one of the reasons I ended up being a director-producer in the end, was that they were so... They had so much work still to do to get Only God Forgives into Cannes. They were trying to get it. They desperately wanted to get it into Cannes and to try to sell it. And there was a lot of post-production they were doing. And in the end, it was easier for them, not to do it. And so I took that role over, basically. But that was always going to be the case, yeah.
Now, one last question, which is kind of fundamental of where I guess cinema's moved from when you started, is the old film versus HD digital. And I asked that because I watched a seminar a panel you were on YouTube, and somebody asked the question there, and you said the positive was something like it gave access to more filmmakers to make film cheaply, to make a film cheaper, and then you went, but I can't think of anything else. So is that you without saying it? Is that you being firmly in the analog film camp?
Yes, and the reason I say that is because it's like the king's new clothes. If enough people say it, enough people believe it, and people jumped on board this whole digital thing when it was in its infancy, when it was terrible, it was awful. It's much, much, much better now, and I'm not anti-digital, by the way. I want everybody to understand that. I think the Alexa camera is a wonderful camera, and it's something I would always carry given the budget. But I'd always have 2 film cameras as my main source of capture, and an Alexa for doing other stuff. It's a tool that we should be using, and it's fantastic. And it's getting much closer to film, but it ain't film. And the end result does not look like film. And so, therefore, people got on this bandwagon about how it was cheaper, how it was better. Both of those statements are lies. You can still shoot on film cheaper than you can shoot on digital. And Kodak have got a rollout system where you can get 2 film cameras, you can get a post-production deal, you can get a developing deal in terms of getting your stock developed on a day-to-day basis on a very good budget. And a film camera now, they give them to you to use, because digital cameras are very expensive to rent. So I hate it when these things happen based on anything but the truth. And, the reality is that the look of film is still much more forgiving and a better look, a better end result, in my opinion, than digital.
Is that something about that film does that as a part of its process, whereas digital, yes, you manipulate it after the fact, as it were?
Yes, exactly that. And there's the thing. I'm going to say something now that will probably offend a lot of cinematographers that shoot only on digital. What's happened to the cinematographer in the modern era is become semi-skilled. It's not skilled like it was in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, where exposure was really important and balance, and where cinematographers knew their art. It's all so post-production based now that, you can take a badly shot film and you can make it into a more interesting film in post-production, whereas that should all be captured in camera.
But you see, that sounds like there's a similar, it's not as rudimentary as you were saying, but I've heard people who were taught to shoot on film full stop are more organised and know what they want to achieve, whereas there's a habit now that's snuck into digital, which is this idea that we shoot and shoot and shoot, and hopefully we have what we need in the camera.
And that's it. That's exactly how directors use the digital format now. There's no doubt about it. Shooting on digital as a cinematographer makes your life so much easier on the one hand, because there's so many things you just don't have to worry about. Where it makes your life far more difficult is that everybody's got an opinion of what they're seeing on a screen. So you've got all the monitors around the set, and nobody's ever watching the right monitor. They all watch the video playback monitors, which don't, if you're shooting in low light levels, don't read it very well. They say, it's too dark. It's this, it's that. Nobody's watching the DIT monitor, which is really where the heart and soul of capturing digital, goes, where you know what you're getting. So you get all these people that have got a view, got an idea. So all the producers now wanted to, whereas before, with film, they didn't know what they were getting to the next day. And sometimes the next day, even for cinematographers that knew their way around film, you had some wonderful experience, because you got stuff that were even better than you would imagine you can get. Sometimes you've got stuff that wasn't as good, but that's the magic. That's the magic of it, But that's been taken away now. Everybody wants, to know what they're getting. Now, people say this to me now. It goes back to Kubrick now. People say, well, for sure, Stanley was so, he embraced technology. He did embrace technology if it worked in the way he wanted to shoot. And people now have got this opinion that he'd have definitely shot on digital. I can tell you now, in my opinion, 100%, if he was making a movie tomorrow, he would test digital better than anyone's ever tested it before, in every shape or form. And his conclusion would be, yeah, it's good, it's interesting, but it's not film.
I feel I can't go anywhere else with that, and I'd love to end there. I can't thank you enough for lending your time to the Britflicks podcast and telling us these wonderful stories about your experiences.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure, and I hope your listeners enjoy it. I hope I didn't ramble on too much.
Alan Parker said, "Sometimes with the British film industry, it's hard to know if we're waving or drowning."
Prime Day is coming July 16th and 17th. With epic deals exclusively for Prime members, you'll feel like you just won an award.
Oh, wow, I didn't even prepare a speech. I'd like to thank my family for always needing stuff. Also Sam, my delivery guy, for bringing all my awesome deals so fast. You're the man, Sam!
Shop deals on electronics, home, and more this Prime Day, July 16th and 17th.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.